thank you, Ambassador Kirsikka-Lehto, Ukraine, and the Embassy of Finland for supporting this gathering. And thank you, Ruth, for producing this event. And thank you, Limon and Alona, and our dear colleagues at the Kibbutzim College and the Levinsky-Wingate Academic Center. We are thrilled by the opportunity to share together, to learn from our colleagues here in Israel, who we don't meet often enough, and from our colleagues in Finland, and strengthen our ties. And I hope this will be a stimulating exchange for everybody here today. I'm going to speak a little bit about, in defense of the basic competencies that we teach in primary education in reading, writing, speaking, and listening. I usually visit schools in our program with other guests, usually with our donors, ministry officials, our partners, or researchers. So imagine our students are having a discussion, the teacher is not involved, she's watching from the side, and the trigger for the discussion is often a text that the whole class has been reading together, a situation arising from a novel, or some other shared text. And when you watch the discussion, the students, and we're talking about 10, 11, 12-year-olds, they are able to listen closely and respectfully to one another. They're able to respond personally and authentically to what other people are saying. They're not performing for the teacher. They're not repeating that successful answer that the teacher smiled about to see if they can get the same reaction from the teacher, usually getting more and more disappointed from the teacher as children say the same thing over and over again. And they learn to agree or disagree with one another. And sometimes, and again, we're talking about an 11-year-old, will say, when we started, I thought A, but now what Shoshana said has convinced me I was wrong, and now I agree with her. Now, the kids also take responsibility that every member of the class takes part, and they will stop the discussion and say, I see that Menbero is trying to speak, and nobody's letting him get in. I want to hear what he has to say. Now, none of this happens by chance. It's the results of years-long explicit instruction that starts in first grade in dialogic conversation, which we integrate into our models for teaching reading and writing. But that's not why I'm telling you this story. On every visit, without fail, one of the guests says to me at the end of this observation, you should bring the Knesset here to see how to conduct a conversation.
Are they literate enough?
That's the question, right? And they're right, because if democracy was functioning the way it's supposed to be, our leaders would talk to each other with respect and with their full attention. And together they would think through what would be the best for our country, and they might even compromise. A meaningful, authentic conversation and taking responsibility for others, of course, are also ways of experiencing and practicing empathy. And that's the first step to being a caring human being and being a responsible citizen. Now, I'm not holding my breath for our politicians, but I have a lot of faith in our students. What's the role of literacy education in promoting equity? Can literacy education level the playing field and advance social mobility? Well, we know that the correlation between socioeconomic status and academic achievement levels in Israel is among the highest in the OECD. Kids in middle and upper income communities do much better academically than kids in lower income communities. The correlation is almost 1-to-1. And we know that the situation is worse in our state religious schools than in our state non-religious schools. In the Arab communities, the situation is particularly dire, and the ultra-Orthodox communities are not even in the conversation. But we also know that children's socioeconomic status is wholly determined and dependent upon their parents' status. So no, for those of us working in the primary school system, intervening that, as we do at the very early stages of formal education, we can't take credit for the social mobility of our graduates 10 or 12, 20 years after they leave us. And truthfully, we can't come close to compensating for all the advantages that my kids and your kids are going to get at home. So it's impossible to level the playing field. But we can adjust the angle of the tilt and give these kids a chance to succeed in middle school and in high school, to achieve at the same level that we would expect from our own children and children in our neighborhoods. And we can try to narrow those gaps, and we know how important the experience of success is for kids. Because if a kid feels like he or she is succeeding academically, they think very differently about themselves, and they think very differently about their future. Now, as Professor Aloni explained so eloquently, if we help students acquire reading and writing, speaking and listening habits, and the habits of mind that they need in the long run to become more fulfilled human beings, they will also be more engaged citizens in a healthy democracy. And Professor Forkash-Baruch explained how formative these years are, but how things have changed because we are in a new world and we have to adapt to the digital world that all of us are living in. It's not just the kids. Yes, it's true, the kids, it seems second nature because they've been playing with these devices since they were old enough to hold one. But all of us spend our lives on screens today. I want to talk about how these primary years are formative, because they're formative in a few senses. First of all, in skills acquisition, and here are the basic competencies, what we usually think of, reading and writing, speaking and listening. These are still crucial, because if kids don't acquire these skills on schedule, and there's a variation, not every kid is ready at age 6, some kids are ready at age 8, but the variation isn't that wide. If these kids don't acquire these literacy skills on time or close to on schedule, it's very hard to catch up later. It's very hard to close those gaps, and those gaps will dog them for years and sometimes for their entire lives. These years are also formative in the sense that kids form their reading and writing habits and their preferences, and those also will go with them for much of their lives. Now, I hear comments all the time that kids today don't read books. They don't do it anymore. They're on screens all the time. They're watching YouTube. They're on Instagram. They don't know anything about books. But we see that if you give kids actual books, if you make the books accessible, and if you give them time to read those books, not just to complete an assignment, but just to read, to encourage them to choose which books they want to read, books will not only open their minds and hearts to worlds beyond their own limited experience, but they will feel the pure pleasure of reading. And that's the secret of literacy. It's fun. You enjoy it. And if you don't learn to enjoy it, you probably will avoid it. By making personal connections to text through feelings, through identifying with characters, through a comparison with their own personal experiences, even if what a kid discovers is how very different someone else's life is from their own, the connection becomes meaningful. And a meaningful connection to a text is the essence of the reading experience and a quality experience that we're trying to promote. And of course, as I said, it's one of the strongest ways we have to encourage empathy. Now, we want kids to feel that pleasure because all of us as adults, outside of reading we have to do for our jobs or our research, all of us as adults read primarily for pleasure. Nobody tells us what to read. And the act of choosing what to read is in itself an expression of freedom, of actively participating in an open society. And the act of empathy is necessary and crucial for social cohesion. So we want kids to read, and we want them to know that it's worth the effort to think about what they're reading. And in this way, they will discover what they think, and they'll be able to share what they discover with other people, either verbally or in writing. Which leads me to teaching writing. Now, I hear also that kids today don't write. The kids can't finish a sentence. In fact, they don't even know that half the sentence is missing. But the truth is, kids today write far more than kids in my generation ever did. We wrote one letter a year. Our school assignments, that was about it. And it's true that today their communications are filled with acronyms like LOL, laughing out loud, for any comment that is even remotely funny or attempting to be funny. And they're using a shorthand, but we also are using that shorthand because we're also sending WhatsApps and texts, even if not all of us are on Instagram. And this shorthand integrates visual imagery, as Alona was pointing out before, like the little thumbs up that all of us do, and you can pick it in a whole bunch of shades of skin tones today, or this, which all of us recognize. Now, this is used usually to say thanks or I appreciate that. What is this? This is actually a Western Christian mode of prayer and contemplation. It's also common in Japanese and Southeast Asian cultures as a greeting of respect or of adoration. One thing it's not is a Jewish mode of prayer. So if we wanted a Jewish icon for something to do with prayer, it would look like this, which would be harder to draw. And most people wouldn't recognize it. And yet, our cultural lexicon has become diverse enough for almost all of us to recognize the intention behind this emoji. So we shouldn't be dismayed with our kids and their written communications on their cell phones day and night. We want to expand those communications. We want to make them more accurate, more expressive, and more intentional. Why else require a child to write a persuasive essay or a research paper, let alone several drafts of a story? I mean, can't they find the answers to any question and the source of all wisdom, Google or Siri? Shouldn't we just be teaching them how to use Google, how to recognize fake news, how to distinguish unreliable sources from more dependable sources of information? Yes, we have to teach them all those things also. But kids have to learn to write in order to discover not what someone else thinks, but what they think. And I use the word discover advisedly, because I think there's a misunderstanding. I also write for a living. Kids don't need to write in order to put their thoughts and feelings into words. They write in order to discover what their thoughts are, to discover and recognize what they are feeling. Through writing, and even more so through rewriting, a person is forced to figure out what he or she thinks and to explain it in a way that someone else will understand. It's an act of uncovering or discovering what you only sensed, sometimes only partially before. So an amorphous feeling becomes recognized as a precise feeling. I'll give you an example. To be annoyed, to be angry, to be furious, similar but not the same. To feel anxious, frightened, to feel terror, to feel dread, these are all related. But again, they're not the same thing. And it's crucial for kids and for all human beings to know the difference and be able to distinguish between them. And one of the things we see very commonly with communities which have lower levels of literacy is that they have trouble distinguishing between these different levels of experience. By identifying the feelings that characters are having in a book they are reading, kids can learn more precisely to recognize and identify their own feelings. And this goes for higher order thinking and reasoning as well. An amorphous thought becomes a precise thought. An argument is sharpened. The connections between different supporting arguments are discovered or strengthened. And irrelevant considerations are dismissed. That usually all comes in the rewriting. Your thinking becomes more developed, more complex, and more complete. Now, through writing, as I said, kids learn to share their thoughts, their questions, their feelings, their imagination with another person. And that other person, the reader, has to be able to understand what the writer is saying without any further assistance. The writer isn't going to be there to say, this is what I meant. So it's not enough for someone to say something and then add, you know what I mean? No, we don't know what you mean. Try again. I want to understand what you mean. Now, we don't have time to discuss which texts form the common heritage or culture in Israel's complicated society. And I'm not going to talk about whether we should or shouldn't be promoting a specific canon. Literacy broadly understood, reading books which all in one way or another grow out of our cultural heritage, choosing which books you want to read, learning to discover what you think and feel and imagine through writing, and learning to share all of that verbally or on the page or on the screen, learning to listen to someone else and respond authentically to what they're saying, practicing empathy and communication. These are skills that any literate member of a democratic society must have. And if we're able to impart these skills to our children, then they can be part of the greater dialogue of cultural literacy which we aspire to, which we want to be the backbone of our society, and then we are truly advancing equity. In conclusion, the stakes could not be any higher.